Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may be tuning in from. Welcome to Outsource Cybersecurity or In-House Security, how to choose the best approach for your organization. My name is Wason Venata. I am the CIO at WatchGuard Technologies. We're located here in Seattle. I've been with the company for about 7 years, so you've seen a lot of different transformations here and just been in the industry in general for over 25 years. Before we get started, a couple of housekeeping items. This is being, you can tune in via audio to the webinar via computer or dial-in. There is a Q&A box located within the webinar itself that you can ask questions in. We'll make sure we can do our best. We'll do our best to answer those questions by the end of the webinar session itself. This is being recorded and it will be shared with you within the next couple of days. And you, last but not least, you will get CPE credits for attending this webinar. All right, so let's talk about what we're going to talk about today and review. And there's a few goals I have in this area, specifically around we want you to walk out of here and give you an approach to choosing a model in terms of whether you want to do outsourced security or in-house security. Also want to provide you with some pros and cons. Now there's going to be a laundry list, a very exhaustive list of certainly, but we'll concentrate on a few pros and cons for both models. And then finally, just talking about some different options and provide some meaningful considerations and thoughts that you need to consider when looking at whether you are doing in-house or outsourced security. But let's start with a poll question that should come up here in a second. And the poll question is, which of the following, there we go, which of the following are your IT priorities in 2022? Select two. So if you can take a second to select those. Digital transformation, it talks more about just how to transform your business, that maybe adding some kind of capabilities for your customers, or maybe something like upgrading an ERP system. Digital enablement I see as just really providing more capabilities internally, enabling maybe some employees to do certain things within your company itself. Cybersecurity, it's a large reason why we're here, and then hybrid, flexible kind of work environment. A new added thing that we need to worry about in IT today, certainly with what has happened over the last couple of years. So I'll give it a couple more minutes, or excuse me, a couple more seconds for you to submit your answer. All right, that should be enough. Could we see the results, please? All right, so interesting, 98% showing cybersecurity, so certainly a reason you're here. Interestingly enough, oops, let me see how it looks like, so my view here, I can't see it as well, but it looks like cybersecurity was the definite leading indicator. Now, the information I got here that you see in front of you on that slide is from a Gartner Peer Insights survey where their community looked at and seen 61% are seeing hybrid kind of flex work environment being the area in which priorities are being driven from. In cybersecurity, certainly high in terms of being number 2 there. But if you saw some of the results in the room here and in the folks in the webinar, I should say, that cybersecurity is why you're here. I will say, interestingly enough, though, that I was reading an article the other day that said there's 134 million workers worldwide that are doing some form of remote working or flex scheduling, which is just an incredible number and really something else to that we all need to consider today. Now, I show you here another incredible number that I can't believe what it is. It's 7.68 million is what it costs you for a cybersecurity incident. And so certainly front and center for us today, and it continues to be such a big pressure cooker there in terms of how you treat security. And so on that note, let's jump in and talk about how to choose a security model to protect your business. For context, just want to, I'm using more Gartner terms here, just something we had access to. So when I say small, medium size, or mid-size or medium business, or large enterprises, I tend to look at, small being under 100 employees, 50 million, under in 50 million in revenue. Mid-size, you're looking at 100 to 999 employees, and then 50 million to 1 billion in terms of revenue. Personally seems kind of high, but hey, that's what they're putting the measure at. And then large enterprises, anything over 1,000 employees, and then $1 billion. So when you look at and assess, I think the thing you need to start being honest with yourself and your organization is, just understand your own capabilities. And again, people can attack this from different angles. I kind of put it into 3 buckets to consider and try to keep it simple. The first is providing comprehensive security. And when I say comprehensive security, everybody's got a little different approach, but most tend to do kind of a layered security approach. And you look at different tools to protect you on different levels, whether it be certainly internally, externally. You're looking at applications, and data, different types of threats that you may have. And so providing that layered security, a company like WatchGuard's got a lot of different things that we can offer you in terms of everything from firewall at your gateway to your endpoints. We have identity management that we take care of. So having that kind of comprehensive approach is certainly something you want to look at. Guarding against threats, and that can mean a couple of things, right? As most of you know, new and evolving threats happen each year. They get trickier and trickier, and bad actors don't stop. But how do you guard against those, and how do you stay up with that in terms of and protect that within your environments is a constant matter that you need to take care of. Educating your workforce. A lot of people will say that your workforce is your weakest link in security. And that may be true in most cases, but I still think it falls on the head of IT, the IT decision maker, head of security. That's still your responsibility. And so are you providing them with annual user training? You may have an organization that may not be tech savvy, and so maybe you do things like phishing campaigns to kind of test them, or you provide them tools to identify phishing, like putting external on your email, for example. Anything that comes external, you flag that. So those are the things that you're helping to educate your workforce, and that I would kind of put under comprehensive security. Now, we can't do anything with our people, and so having the right IT expertise is certainly big. And today it's even trickier. Right? And before, when you just guarded your perimeter, you had your network and those folks that took care of a lot of that security. But you have hybrid environments, the cloud. You have multiple clouds today, right? And so that's key, and something that takes a specialty in. Identity access management, looking at that and today that's kind of really overshadowed and taken over everything, in terms of that's your front line of defense now is your identity access management. So does your team have those skills to maintain that and understand that? And you have to do continuous enforcement and monitoring, right? Patching. That in itself can be a tricky game to attack and look at. It's not as straightforward as people may think. Monitoring different threats, and kind of briefly touched on that earlier. But I like something like vulnerability management. Once you identify what you want to scan, in terms of vulnerabilities, setting that up might be easy, but remediation, extremely tricky, right? and very hard to maintain and do and stay up on. Process management, I put that under employees, and just knowing how do you handle incidents, how do you create problems from that, problem management, that is. Disaster recovery, business continuity, how do you do that, and who's documenting that, who's taking care of that, who's maintaining that. Data classification is huge today too as well, and so that's what I put under, in terms of skill sets and expertise, and things that you need to know within that area, and that you need to assess your capabilities. And then as an IT decision maker, management and responsibilities, right? First off, what's your biggest threat to your business? And most, it'll probably be your intellectual property, which makes a lot of sense. But Maybe for some it's guarding data and where your data is at and what you're doing with your data, and sensitive data at that. And so knowing and understanding your threat, as a business leader and IT leader, you need to know that. The governance, maybe privacy and compliance today. Some of you may be saying, well, that's kind of a legal problem, and they may own it in your organization, but IT plays an incredible, huge role in that, and that's evolved through the years. For those of you who do global business, the privacy is different in every region. They're a lot stricter in Europe. And so that still falls back on IT to implement and to manage and take care of. And when you look at things like ISO 27001, perhaps that's something you're looking at doing. Well, that takes annually a lot of work to maintain those types of certifications. And so it's definitely something around governance is certainly something big that you need to manage and take care of today. And then finally, really kind of what security kind of all boils down to is what level of risk are you willing to take? And there's always a lot of different decisions to look at. Should I go left? Should I go right? It looks ugly both ways. So what level of risk am I willing to take in our business is something certainly you need to look at. So do we outsource security or do you keep it in-house? Well, like a lot of things, it depends, right? And it depends on what certainly business you're in and a lot of what your challenges that you may have again ahead of you. And so what I look at is really, I kind of boil it down to three factors to try to simplify it and try to drive you to help you make a decision. And the first one is, what problem are you trying to solve? Second, how complex I think your environment is a key driver. And then we mentioned it a little earlier, but really, what level of risk are you willing to take? So let's unpack each of those. So the first, in what problem are you trying to solve? Look at staffing needs. It's probably really front and center, and maybe one of the bigger things to look at in terms of your ability to maintain security in-house. Right? And so hiring that expertise is very tricky. I look at WatchGuard is located in Seattle, and if you're familiar with North America, Seattle's probably one of the hotter spots in North America in terms of having a lot of technical expertise. But I can say to you that it's very difficult keeping and maintaining and finding the right security personnel. In general, in the industry, we're short on security expertise. Another area that's interesting here in Seattle that we have to deal with is WatchGuard is a medium-sized company. Well, we have big players in our backyard, and you have the Microsofts and Amazons, which if you've been looking at and keeping up with any of the press there around them, they're doubling their salaries or increasing salaries this year to remain competitive. Well, that puts the pressure on companies like us in mid-size in terms of trying to maintain your resources. And so staffing, big needs there. In terms of, you may be looking at 24/7 monitoring, so you need a SOC team. That might be some other type of staffing needs, and so that takes a lot of folks to do that. Maybe security is something that because of where its shape and looks like today, that it's that you may be looking for some leadership guidance in that area. And so a virtual CISO may be something that you need in terms of security. So maybe you have a few personnel, but you need someone to come in and set up that vision for you. So that may make sense there too. I will mention one more thing too around staffing needs. I would have said pre-pandemic, if you don't have the staffing expertise in your area, then you may want to look at outsourcing. But today with remote, that changes that, right? And so you may be a lot more comfortable with having someone remotely working for you today in this area. What problem you're trying to solve also includes operations and monitoring, I'll call it, right? And scanning and remediation. I talked already about vulnerability management and running that program. There's certainly things around, certainly patching and staying up on that and monitoring patching and doing that in a timely manner. Again, I mentioned the vulnerability management around the remediation being extremely tough to stay up on. A lot of false positives fall out of that. So you spend a lot of time reviewing things that may not be that big of a deal for you in your area. looking at tools, systems, applications. There's so many things that you can purchase today to protect you. When you look at things from a prevent, detect, and response mode, there are so many tools within those areas that you may want to look at. So which ones should you get? Which ones could you use? How much do they cost? How do they fit in? So there's a lot that goes into looking at that, and so what problems may lie there. I talked briefly already about regulatory compliance and privacy, things like ISO 27001. Some of you on the phone may even have stricter the regulations that you may follow. If you're in healthcare, you're constantly having to be monitored in terms of what you have and how you're maintaining that. And so those are areas with, what are you trying to solve in terms of operations and monitoring? And then some of you may have advanced needs, right? Threat intelligence, I think that's taking on a whole nother level today. I can tell you within WatchGuard, we offer services in this area, and we can see and we have a lot of data now from our customers. And the benefit there I see is if you break things down, you break it down in terms of, as an example, industries, right? And you can see hospitality, retail, maybe healthcare, and we can see certain threats happening in certain areas that can help other. You may see something in hospitality that you can help out if you're in the retail space. And so we're seeing a lot of that. And so to be able to kind of correlate and bring a lot of those tools together for you, it's becoming increasingly important in that. But it is advanced, it's difficult, and it's hard to maintain. Perhaps forensics. Now, forensics, you might only do that when you have a breach or something of that nature, but maybe that's something you're looking at. Blue team, red team service, maybe you do an annual pen test, but maybe you want to start bringing a lot of that functionality in-house and doing something more on a quarterly basis. And so what problems are you trying to solve? That's what falls into that base. Now, when I talk about complexity, it's pretty kind of self-explanatory in some respects, but I think it is something that you need to take into consideration. And when you look at that, your environment, highly complex environment, hybrid models, and maybe you have multiple clouds, you have an on-premise. If your global reach is far, meaning you have, maybe you have a dozen operational centers around the globe. You have some presence in each region. Well, when you start introducing hybrid models, you got a larger global reach. Well, then your integrations and your systems, you have multiple things to look at and consider. It starts getting much more complicated to maintain that. Throw in and sprinkle in regulatory factors depending where you are. And those rules change on an annual basis. And so you have to constantly maintain and monitor that. All of that starts making you deploy more things, right? And everything from a simple patch or security update that you need to do to deploying products to production. And all of that starts adding complexity. You may have different models there. And let's face it, in IT for a long time, for most of us, we don't have a lot of, we don't always have the right personnel or amount of personnel that we have in place. We're always fighting against budget and getting the right things updated. And so in some shape or form, you're always transforming. And so that adds, high complexity. Now on the extreme other end, low complexity would be something simple as, a small office, doctor's office. Maybe you have a few locations, a larger team, but it's centrally located. Or you have a small business, it's not tech-based, maybe you offer some type of service, but you still have a back office systems, financial systems, maybe a CRM tool or something like that. And so it's maybe a little less complex. And for maybe a lot of you on the phone, you kind of fall in between too, right? And so you need to understand, I think, the complexity behind that to help make that decision. And then the final factor to look at, I think it just always boils down to risk, right? And what risk are you looking at taking, whether you do it, keep it in-house or outsource, right? And some things to consider in outsourcing, for example, in terms of risk is the outsourcer that you select to choose business in to do with, right? And what their capabilities are. How about for those of you, and I'll put myself in that bucket too. Today, I know who in my organization, their different skill sets they have, and if there is an incident or something that happens, I can grab the certain personnel, and I know who he or she is that's working on that problem. I know them by name, and I know their capabilities. Well, now you're going to start shipping things out to outsource. You may not know who that is, who's working on your problem. You may not know where they're located, and so are you willing to take that risk, right? There's another risk around collaboration. What may happen is your internal resources may not feel like they really have to pay attention to security because that's now outsourced, right? And so are you willing to, and is that a risk to your business, right? There's different things around management skills and in terms of vendor management that maybe you're looking at weighing in terms of a risk. Right? And then don't forget some of the things I've mentioned earlier around what's the biggest risk to your business, what does data look like, and where is that at, right? And how do you stay up on some of those things? And so those are some areas that around you need to weigh the risk that's relevant to your business in helping you make that decision of whether you outsource security or you keep that in-house. So let's shift gears and kind of talk about really the benefits and drawbacks. We'll start out with outsourced security and what its benefits and drawbacks are and some things to consider. But first, let's go back to a poll question. I think the team here is going to pull that up here in a second for you. The question is, what percentage of companies outsource at least one part of security? And so your choices are 30%, 55%, 80%, or 99%. And I'll be honest with you, the first poll question that was put up, I didn't realize in my bottom right hand, I actually can see these quicker. So now I can see them come in. It looks like we have 65% voted. So we'll give it a few more seconds here. It's going back. I can show you that, tell you it's going back between 80% and 30% seems to be the most common votes. We've got over 75% in. We'll give it another second or two for those of you deciding. And I'll leave it at that. It looks like we got about 78% of folks voting in. To the team that's helping manage this, let's close this. Let's see what the final results are. And it looks like 80% is what most of you thought. And I am with you. I actually thought that myself. However, it's and 99% is 3%. I'm with you too as well. Let's close the poll and get back to the slides here. I'm surprised as much as you are. Deloitte says that in a survey in 2019 that 99% is actually the answer. So I'm with you though. I would have never chosen that. But I guess they mean things like a pen test. If you do a pen test annually, that's technically outsourcing your part of your security. So perhaps that's what may be things that you may not have thought of. At least that's not what I thought of. So I'm with you. I would have thought it would be somewhere around 80%. Well, let's dive into the benefits of outsourcing. Right out of the gate, and probably the biggest one is certainly you have proven security expertise and experience, right? In most cases, you have a dedicated, trained staff. These are the folks that I've met and talked to in the past. They're passionate about security. They have longtime security professionals that are there. For some companies, they've done this multiple times. They've learned from other companies that they've worked with or they've supported through the years, and they've passed that on to future clients. So the ability to monitor and maintain, that's extremely key. There's sort of a wash, rinse, repeat cycle in some respects in that they have the machine to actually go through and kind of work through a lot of this stuff. So having that security expertise and experience is key. It's huge, and it's definitely a huge benefit right out of the gate. Now, in most cases, perhaps a lower TCO costs. So some of the thought there is that if you don't have some of these tools, the upfront cost to get those in place, if you kept them in-house, is high. But here, it could be lower because they have a lot of those things baked and done, right? And really, you're essentially expanding your IT capabilities here, right? At potentially a lower or more cost-effective way. And go back to that earlier slide where I talked about comprehensive security. So those layer that approach there, you may be able to actually have a lot more covered there by providing, working with a provider. And then don't forget the people costs. When someone leaves, the cost is high, and that takes a lot out of your business. And so there's a lot that there's a lot of big costs there in that business. In terms of broader tool offerings, there's a lot more they offer. I can tell you the partners that we work with. WatchGuard has our unified security platform. We protect you from the endpoint to the gateway to the user base. We have a single pane of glass. So being able to have tools like that that cover you on a lot of different levels, it kind of helps you a lot with your threat monitoring, and it helps provide with a broader set of tools that you may not have access to, or that you may have had to purchase separately one-on-one. And so another area in terms of offering too to think about is baked integrations. A lot of these companies have done this before, and so they have a lot of different integrations, and so they may be able to integrate with your business much smoother and quicker and much more seamless in terms of providing you those capabilities. Now, for folks that do not have maybe a technical staff, you're able to focus on your business, right? And so that's a huge key for you, is that you can actually go back and worry about your business needs opposed to worrying about your security needs. And so those are some of the key benefits in this area. So let's talk about the drawbacks, and one of probably the bigger ones is your data concerns, right? Especially if you're a healthcare, for example. Giving access to your sensitive data, is that something you're comfortable with? Right? And if you are, where's your data located? Who's accessing your data? Right? And for some, that may be just enough to not want to actually even move forward with outsourcing. Right? And so I think it's that much of a key for some folks, because really losing data today, especially sensitive data, can get you in a whole heap of mess, right? And that a lot of us just don't want to be part of. How about control? I think is probably the next one, and losing flexibility, right? Not having access to your info or your capabilities, your area, not kind of relinquishing some of that may not be something you're extremely comfortable with, right? Maybe some of it moves offshore, and it's something that you're not wanting to look at or wanting to do. And who's working on your stuff? Those are things that just may not be maybe a drawback for you. Right? Potential confusion on responsibilities. There's a lot of coordination that's going to happen there, right? And look, as much as we want to automate every patch, the reality of it is not everything gets patched. It falls out. So who's doing that? Who's updating that? How do you know who's doing that? And so there's might be some confusion around whose responsibility. Security is not may not. Some of your personnel may not see security as part of their job anymore. And so you have to stay up on some of that and kind of constantly remind folks about that, but that may be enough to be a drawback. And then the last drawback is just your vendor management. I think that greatly increases, right? Everything from monitoring the contract and seeing what you can do, keeping your vendor up to date on your business and keeping them exposed, right? Do they really know and understand your business? And where are they? How many clients do they have? How much time do they spend with you? And so, are you staying up and reading their reports that they're providing you? If they are providing you reports, there's certain things too that I think of. It's a business, and they're trying to maximize profits, and maybe they're not running as efficiently as you'd want them to. And so there's just things around vendor management that you need to pay attention to, and that just becomes a potential drawback in this scenario. Let's shift focus to in-house security benefits and drawbacks. We'll start with a poll question here. So the team, if you could get the poll question up. The poll question is, what percentage of organizations lack in-house security expertise? So what percentage of organizations lack in-house security expertise? 15%, 35%, 55%, or 85%? looking at our monitor here, and 50% have voted, and so far 85% have it seems to be in the lead, with 55% closely behind. We've got about 67%. We'll give it another second for a few of you to vote. Looks like 85% is holding strong. We're just at about 75%. All right, team, can we close the poll? All right, it looks like 85% is the leader. 63% of you believe that. And number two, the 29% of you believe 55%. And 35 and 15 trailing there. Well, if we can release the poll, I can show you what the answer is. 55% according to a recent Gartner survey. So I am with the 63%. I chose 85 myself. That's what I would have done. Funny today, a lot of these surveys, the 3 poll questions, I myself have gone with the majority and hasn't quite gotten it right. But those of you who, the 29% who chose 55, good on you. You're looking at it. You got it. And so in-house, certainly let's talk about those benefits in-house. And I'll be honest with you, for me, the greater control, right? It's probably the biggest, right? It's being able to know and being in control of what you own, and what you have to protect in your business, and understanding that and being close to that, and really just relying on the internal expertise that we have here. I guess the luxury I have here and the personnel we get to work at. Now, WatchGuard's a cybersecurity company, so we have a lot of folks that are here because they are passionate about security. And so we have a lot of expertise and a lot of access to industry experts here. And so having that control, though, a lot of you may not have that in your back pocket, but still the control of managing your area is extremely important. And then, loosely tied, but knowing your complexity of what you have in-house, right? And how things are set up and how your systems are constructed, and go back to kind of the complex area. If you have a lot of different integrations, a lot of different sites, and that complexity, but where these components lie, and you know how to manage them and attack them. And so this is something certainly that just knowing your complexity that you rather have in-house, right? And that you rather just kind of manage that, and because it's complex, you feel more comfortable with managing that. Intellectual property, kind of look at it in really 2 areas, right? The first off is just whatever that intellectual property that you're protecting for your company. That's certainly an area that you want to have control of that, right? But also just the intellectual property of how you attack your problem. That I talked about earlier, that layered security, right? And those tools that you use, and those things that in companies like WatchGuard, we offer, again, a lot of things around, certainly the firewall, multi-factor authentication, right? And so some of your key areas around identity management and how you do that, and whatever that secret sauce is, that may be something that you want and that you want to design for your business, where in an outsource, you just may get a canned approach that everyone gets, right? And that may not suit your business. And so being able to protect that and have that internally is something that that is, I think, a benefit of keeping it in-house. And then the strategic direction, you as the IT decision maker, that, right? Whatever your strategic direction is. A couple of years ago, at WatchGuard, we were buying companies left and right, and that was part of our strategy. And we were building out these components and building out our portfolio. Well, knowing that, and that shift and change that comes with running IT and enabling security within IT, so being able to know that direction and be able to being agile and moving with that direction, certainly keeping it in-house allows you and provides you that benefit of being agile around your direction. So let's shift gears on drawbacks, and you'll see, obviously, at this point in the presentation, you'll see a lot of the things that are opposite of what outsourcing benefits are, right? And so the drawback is the obvious one is the skill set. We've talked about it earlier. I've mentioned it earlier to you in terms of finding qualified people. And if you can, how do you maintain them when you got salaries from your companies in your backyard that are offering things much higher and that you might not be able to stay up with, right? Amazon WatchGuard's a private company. Amazon and Microsoft are private, and so they could offer different shares and so forth. And so there's different things to look at and consider, right? And training them and keeping them up on that. And so maybe the resources you can find remotely now because of how we are through the pandemic and how we've become more comfortable and how we've used video a lot more. So maybe it can help you out there. But in the end, big drawback is the skill sets. Trends and threats. I look at just think about the vast amount of those that happen today. Look, the bad actors pick on big companies and small companies. Everyone's exposed to it today. You hear a lot of security professionals saying that it's not a matter of if, it's when you get breached, right, or some kind of bad actor, something that happens against you. And so understanding and knowing those threats and staying on those threats and really diving into them, it takes a lot to do that, and it takes a lot of professional expertise and a lot of personnel to do that. After hours support, most of your IT personnel already kind of monitor and watch incidents and after hours, that is. And so if you don't have a lot of automation in place, the security, same thing, who's watching that overnight, right? And so this is something where it becomes difficult to put in, and maybe an outsourcer has that capability, right? And so it's a big drawback to really look at some of the stuff after hours if you don't have the automation or if you don't have the threat intelligence kind of correlating things. So that could be a potential problem too. And then lastly is balancing workloads, right? Look, most IT organizations you're sharing, right? Your IT personnel may be your security personnel, or maybe you only have one security engineer for 8 other personnel, for example. And so how do you balance those workloads and those threats, right? And I'll give you an example. Ransomware, it's still, you still see a lot of that today. And when I think of one of the things that you can do to prevent that, or one of the practices that you should do is look at your backup strategy. For a long time, most companies did a 3-2-1 backup, right? So you have 3 different copies in 2 different medias and one and located offsite somewhere, right? And so that's your 3-2-1 mix. A lot of folks will tell you now that ransomware, you should employ a 3-2-2, right? So same thing up front, 3 copies. You have 2 medias, but you have 2 offsite locations, right? Well, if you already had an offsite location, and then maybe you want your second one is now the cloud, well, that's taking a whole lot of data and piping it up. You need to get more lines in place. You need to look at your bandwidth. And so it just causes a lot of work. And so it takes away from your normal day-to-day. Your personnel now have to get that into place. And so who's doing that and how you're doing that. So balancing some of that work can get tricky at times when you don't have either the right or all the personnel in place that you're looking for. And so that kind of rounds out really the drawbacks for in-house and out-house. And so I'll go into the final areas. We're almost there. Stick with me. The final considerations in terms of whether you're looking at outsourcing or keeping it in-house. And so the first thing I look at is, in my consideration, my final thoughts to you is, first off, do your homework. And know what you're signing up for, know what you're paying for, your contract, what MSSPs. You can talk to a lot of folks who have used them and get different backgrounds on that, but really matching the MSSP to your requirements, I think, is key. So go back at the top of where I had mentioned, what problem are you trying to solve? And so if you're looking for something that's comprehensive, an MSSP may be good with tools, but they don't have the incident management, incident response that you're looking for. And so making sure you match that, right? And comparing them apples to apples in terms of what you're actually looking for in terms of, ultimately solving that problem, your security problem, and how you protect that. Right? So that'd be the first thing I would highly suggest that you need to make sure you do and go into and look at. And then know your goals, right? Write down the goals for the program, in terms of, what are your guiding principles around risk, right? What are you trying to accomplish? What are things that you don't want to do? And so in helping you make the determination, knowing those guiding principles of things that you may or may not be comfortable with. So writing those down, having those goals. And if you do choose an outsourcer, then what are the goals of that program, right? And so that vendor you're working with, they know those goals, right? And in some cases, look, when you're going through this, maybe co-sourcing, right, may be a goal of yours, and meaning you take something small initially, you try it out, there's a trial period, and then eventually you start expanding more capabilities. So that might be something that fits you. I think something that's extremely big, and you notice through most of this presentation, I never mentioned cost. And that could be a factor up front that some of you may have been thinking, hey, you're missing that. That should be a factor. And I don't disagree with you. It is a factor. But I deliberately kept this at the end for a big reason. I feel like in IT, it's something we work with on our teams. I call it our best fit first, right? And so what I think is you should do is not lead with cost in mind. Don't lead with the budget you have to work with. What I say is go out and look for the solution that best fits solving your problem at hand. Right? And don't let money be the burden. Right? Because I hear a lot of folks say, I don't want to choose that software. I don't want to look at it because I know they're expensive. My belief is find the best fit solution to solve your problem. Then when you go in negotiations, there's a lot of different things you can try, right? You can sign a deal over 3 years to lower your annual costs. Maybe there's different things that you can help and with the vendor. Maybe you can present at their conference, be a reference. Maybe you can kind of backload the deal where upfront you're not paying as much, but in year 3 you pay more. There's different strategies you can do. Now, in the end, I get it. It does come down to budget. I got it, right? And so you may not be able to buy that solution you really want. But here's what you have going forward is that your executives, your senior managers know what you wanted. They know where the gaps are today, right? And you know where those are. So a couple of things from there is maybe next year, those are things you take back to fill in those gaps. And you do get more budget. Or if something bad happens, these are areas you told your company that you wanted to close, right? And so you have that. And so what I say to you, that's why I say, don't lead with money in mind. Lead with what problem you're trying to solve, then figure out the money stuff later. I mentioned it a couple of times, and some of you maybe look at something as Agile that you can put in both a pro and a con. And just for me though, I just think think about our business today, right? In terms of things just moves fast in IT and tech. And so I think being agile is extremely important. And so really understanding who can help you there. And maybe outsourcing can help you, but maybe keeping it in-house too as well. But I think agile is something that you should definitely consider front and center. We're almost there. Second to last, insurance, right? Cyber insurance has changed. I think most of you know that. I'm part of a CIO community here in Seattle. We meet on a quarterly basis, and last quarter we met at the beginning of the year, and each company's insurance either doubled, some tripled, and a lot of I can see I've seen it. A lot of scanning is happening now where they're scanning us and they're asking us how we're remediating things. And some of it, it might be a whole different topic because how they're doing the scans and what they're looking at, they don't really tell you. But I say here, make sure you know how this outsourcing or keeping it in-house impacts your security, right? Don't forget to look at that component. And last but certainly not least, you own it. And this is probably mostly, if you're internal, obviously you own it and you know that. This is probably something for more of those of you looking at outsourcing. It's not set and forget. Security is not set and forget if you outsource that. Right? You own the problem. It's not like a little SaaS thing that you can put out there and it's someone else will maintain it and patch it for you, things like that. I think security, you still need to be heavily involved if you outsource it. It's something that you need to be very aware of. You need to keep your vendor, the MSSP that you're working at, you need to keep them informed of your business and what's happening and how things are working and functioning. And so I do think you need to make sure and be aware that you own that problem, regardless of where it sits. And with that, I thank you for joining today, definitely, and I guess we can get into Q&A. I think there are a few questions here. When it comes to planning, not implementing. Sorry. So the question here is, when it comes to planning, not implementing a robust third-party risk management program, is this something that companies should plan in-house, or should we let the external professionals do? I think it would come down to the knowledge and expertise you may have in-house. That if you have that, I could say is something like I mentioned earlier, WatchGuard. We have a lot of industry professionals with us, and so that's something that we can definitely look at using internally. But most may not have that, and so I would kind of tend to lean towards maybe using external professionals to do that. A staunch advocate that cybersecurity is something that should be managed in-house, but lately alert fatigue and lack of security experts has moved us to outsource some services which actually are working very well. Is this something that you see happening on a global basis, or is this just happening in Europe? So thanks for the question from Europe. I actually would say in the States too, I'm the same both with you. It looks like the asker's name is John W. So John, I'm in the same. I'm myself personally am an advocate of keeping it in house. That comment I made earlier about control, that's me, right? I want to be able to control and be responsible of that. But I'm with you. Yeah, you're right. There is a lot of alert fatigue, and then the expertise. And I do see in the States, I can tell you from what we see in the WatchGuard community, right? WatchGuard works with a lot of MSSPs. Their businesses are growing. A lot of MSPs are converting to MSSPs because there's just a lot of need for security. So yes, in the States, I can tell you that that is happening here as well, definitely. Any other questions? All right, well, I appreciate the few. I definitely, again, I thank you very much for joining today's webinar. If you want to learn more about WatchGuard, we do have a lot of products that we offer in the cybersecurity space. I mentioned some of them earlier, a unified security platform. We do protect you in terms of multi-factor authentication. We have secure Wi-Fi. And so those are a lot of products that we offer here at WatchGuard. So please reach out, let us see how we can help you. And again, I thank everybody. And from wherever you're tuning in from, or if you're watching this on the webinar, I hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thank you.